In today's episode, Tracy asks, what are some questions you should ask vendors to better understand what data they use in their algorithms to make sure it's not biased? So it's not a question, well, it's not just questions we need to ask. Bias is like any other professional vetting that you want to do, in that there are things to look for and things to request from a vendor, the same way that you would vet a vendor for equal opportunity employment, for non-discrimination, for fiduciary responsibility. There are so many different aspects to auditing and doing your due diligence on a company. And checking for bias in artificial intelligence and machine learning models really shouldn't be any different than checking to see if a vendor is, Title VII compliant, right? If the vendor discriminates against people in hiring, you probably would want to do that. Know that. When you look at any of these audit forms that you're required to fill out, if you've ever been through a corporate audit, they're delightfully fun. But there are lots of questions about, what's your process around hiring? What's your process around alignment to the Equal Opportunity Employment Act? All these different ways to look for problems. When it comes to bias in AI and dealing with vendors, it's important to understand what kinds of bias to look for. There's 6 places you want to look for it, and we've got other videos in this show. If you want to head over to the YouTube channel, you can see better definitions and stuff. But the 6 areas, I'll bring this up here, the 6 areas where bias creeps in AI and machine learning are people, strategy, data, algorithms, models, and actions. So let's talk about each one of these as it relates to a vendor. Number 1, people is easy. Who has been hired, right? Who are the people working on the models and algorithms? Who are the people building the software? If you look at the development team or the engineering team and you see a complete lack of diversity, there's probably going to be a problem, right? Even if it's not intentional, just having a monolithic view of the world, if it's a bunch of, say mid-20s Caucasian males, that's your whole development team, they have a natural mindset that does not include people who are black, because it's not in their experience, right? It's not saying that they're bad people. It's just they simply do not have the experience. If none of them are female, they have no frame of reference for things that females, people who identify as female, might be interested in, right? So that's an easy one. Look at the people, look at the composition of the people, look at the diversity of the people, and if you don't see any diversity, there's a problem. This, by the way, applies not just to AI and machine learning, but to every vendor. If you're hiring like a PR agency, go to that agency's leadership team. If you see a whole bunch of people who look exactly the same, there's a diversity problem. Which means there's a diversity of ideas problem. Second, strategy is where bias can creep in. What is the strategy that somebody's going for? Really good example of this. Facebook has a strategy of engagement, right? They care about getting eyeballs stuck to their site, which means their algorithms tend to promote things that keep people engaged, like making people angry and afraid all the time. And so the outcomes from that strategy have been, as we've all seen, pretty substantially negative, right? We see flourishing of hate groups and all these things because that's the strategy. Did they intend to allow Nazi groups to flourish? Probably not. But it is a natural outcome of an incomplete strategy, or a strategy that was not informed by a diverse set of objectives? Yes. Third, data. Bias creeps in data. Where did the data come from? Right? This is what's called data lineage or data provenance. How good is the data? Is the data itself balanced? Is it representative? IBM has a fantastic toolkit called the IBM Fairness 360 toolkit. If you're fluent in Python, you can download this for free, run it on your data, declare any protected classes, things like age, gender, veteran status, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, race, religion, and in your data, it will then say, hey, this model does not look representative, or this model has a lot of drift, or this model this data is likely to behave badly. So checking your data, the lineage of the data is important. Where did your data come from? if your data came from sources that themselves are biased. That can be a big problem. For example, Black American healthcare. All the data is wrong, right? Because of systemic racism, you cannot get really good large-scale data on Black American healthcare because there isn't good data. Systemic discrimination has created an entire pool of corrupted data. Number 4, algorithms. So the algorithms are the individual choices that you make for what your model is going to do, what strategy you're going to pursue from an algorithm point of view. This is things like deciding if you're going for gradient boosting or generalized linear regressions. All these different choices. Bias can creep in here because if you have somebody who doesn't understand the full objectives and doesn't have a background in diversity, they may choose a computationally efficient algorithm, but not necessarily one that is fair. So this would be a case, for example, of using something like a straight-up gradient boosting model versus something like Pareto multi-objective optimization. The algorithms are very different. Pareto optimization allows you to essentially do what's called trade-off analytics. You will get a less well-performing model, but it performs against many different objectives as opposed to one objective, kind of like what Facebook versus like LinkedIn, how they function. They function very differently because of their optimization algorithms. Number 5, the model itself. The model can drift. The model, when it takes in data, as it takes in new data over time, it can drift. The most famous example of this is the Microsoft Tay chatbot, which was corrupted by trolls, basically. Within 24 hours, it became a porn-spewing neo-Nazi chatbot. It was trained properly, but it drifted. It didn't have guardrails to keep it on the rails. So that's a place where bias can creep in. And last is the actions. What do you do with the model? Right? What are you going to use this model for? This is a good example of this is a MarTech vendor I saw that was effectively reinvented redlining. Right? They built a tool to identify ideal customers, and it reinvented redlining. And so bias crept in what their model they're going to do with the model. So that's, in a very short period of time, all the places that bias can creep in throughout the process. When you're auditing vendors, when you're doing a due diligence, ask them for their documentation about how they prevent bias in each of these areas, right? You would not get on a plane if you walked in the cockpit and you saw there was no quick reference handbook, there was no pre-flight checklist, and the pilots were just kind of winging it, right? You do not get on that plane. Because that is an unsafe plane. There's no documentation, there's no process, there's no validation that things are working as they should be. The same is true with AI and bias, right? If a company has no documentation, no processes, no rigor, no checking for bias in each of these areas with real checklists, like real documented checklists, here's the bullet points that we look for at each stage of our projects, then there's a good chance bias is crept in. And in turn, that means there's a good chance that what they produce is also biased too. So look for those, ask for those as part of your process. And if they can't produce it, it's probably a problem, right? That's the easiest way to vet a vendor. Ask them for the documentation, call it part of compliance or whatever. And the vendors themselves should recognize that if they don't have this, they themselves are at legal risk, right? Because they can't prove then they're not biased. So, great question. We could spend a whole lot of time on this. Great question. If you have follow-up questions, leave them in the comments box below. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and the newsletter. I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Want help solving your company's data, analytics, and digital marketing problems? Visit trustinsights.ai today and let us know how we can help you.